Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the GSL-English Podcast. My name is Gideon, and this is a podcast for all learners of English to practice and improve in a relaxed and natural way. And that is exactly what we are going to do today. The theme, the topic of this episode is curiosity. Okay, we are going to talk about curiosity, about being curious. And we are specifically going to read an extremely well-written article with the title, The Perks of Being Relentlessly Curious. It is absolutely superb. So we're going to read that article together. We're going to break it down, talk about what it means, and as we go through, we'll discuss the vocabulary, different expressions that are used. So you'll definitely come away with something new. But if you are new here, if you are new to this podcast or on whatever your preferred platform is, thank you so much for clicking on it. I do appreciate it. Please don't forget to subscribe, follow, and like this episode. But if you are a returning viewer, thank you so much. Thank you for tuning back in. I hope you've had a good week wherever you are, whatever you've been doing. It's coming up to that time of year, isn't it, where we're all just winding down a little bit. Winding down is a brilliant phrasal verb that means, just calming down, hopefully taking a bit of the pressure off. For me, it's been one of those weeks where I've just had to force myself to be productive because next week I have no work. I've decided to take the week off work. I'm going to try and stay off my phone, all of that. So this week, I should have been a lot more productive than I actually have. I had a lot of things to get done, but I haven't. And this podcast being one of them. So I did plan on recording a few episodes this week to get ahead, but it was a nice idea, but it did not come into fruition. So yeah, but that's life. It's coming up to the end of the year. It's time to have a bit of a break, isn't it? Take the foot off the accelerator, so to speak. So I hope you're getting chance to do that. And hopefully this podcast helps you just to relax a little bit. I always say, if you can, grab a cup of tea, grab a cup of coffee, just relax, enjoy studying English with me. Now, you will notice, if you're watching on YouTube, slight camera angle change. Got the desk in the foreground, got my laptop there, just trying to make it look a little bit more professional. Been taking some advice from other podcasters. So let me know, do you like this angle? Does it look more professional? Does it make you respect me even more? Or does it make you respect me at all? Having, just looking a little bit more professional. Let me know in the comments. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Or do you just not care and want me to get on with the podcast? Either way, let me know. So, curiosity. To be curious. What is it? What does it mean? What does curiosity mean? What does it mean to be curious? Well, curiosity is a strong desire to know or learn something. Okay? When we talk about curiosity, that's what we're talking about. A strong desire, a strong want to know or learn something. And particularly, you think back to a child, or perhaps when we were younger, you're curious about everything, aren't you? You subconsciously want to learn about things, know about things. And we go on to talk about that a little bit later in the podcast. Why does curiosity seem to diminish or lessen as we go through life? Maybe it's just me, but we'll talk about that in a little bit later. And when we think about curiosity, this concept, a strong desire to know or learn something, it's given birth to some of the most incredible creations and inventions, hasn't it? If it wasn't for curiosity, we wouldn't have a lot of things that we do today. Certain pieces of art, certain architecture, certain inventions that we use every day, if it wasn't for somebody's curiosity to know or learn about something, we wouldn't have a lot of the incredible things that we do today. But it raises the question, how do we keep that curiosity alive? And what I mean by this is, it might just be me, I don't know. But as we get older, that curiosity, it does seem to diminish a little bit, doesn't it? We just don't seem as curious as we once were. And I've got my own thoughts and opinions on this, but I thought, you know what? I'm going to ask Google. Google knows everything. So I asked Google, I said, why do we get less curious as we get older? And it gave me a very AI answer, if you will. You can just tell when some answers are artificial intelligence. But this is what it said, and I thought this answer was quite interesting. While some studies have found that curiosity remains stable throughout adulthood, many others have found that curiosity declines with age, especially intellectual curiosity. Some say that curiosity can be lost as people shift from curious learning to knowing. Now that really stood out to me. Okay, so the initial part there, some studies say, no, you stay as curious, it stays stable, it stays consistent throughout adulthood. Okay, that might be true. But I fall into the latter category of this answer here, that many found that curiosity declines with age, especially intellectual curiosity, the idea of learning, the idea of gaining information. And the curiosity can be lost as people shift from curious learning to knowing, because as we go through life, we do learn, don't we? And we get to the point where we know things. We'll never know everything. But we do shift more from the process of learning to simply knowing. And I wonder if it's where we get to a point where we just know enough. We know enough for our life situation. For example, perhaps we're settled down a little bit in life. We've got a career, got our house, got our family. We have that level of stability. So that stifles our intellectual curiosity, because we've got to a point where we know enough to get by, to live our life. So we don't carry on asking questions. This is very general, by the way. We might just be a curious person by nature. And I think many of us are curious about things we are interested in. But I'm talking about that general curiosity of life. And I think curiosity is something that we have to keep alive, isn't it? Now, to be curious, to ask questions is a brilliant thing. So that leads us nicely into the article that we're going to read. Now, it's from a website called coffeeandjunk.com. Love this website. All credit for this article goes to them. And if you're looking for some thought-provoking reading to practice your reading in English, or just to get the cogs turning a little bit, to get you thinking, I highly recommend it. Okay? I highly recommend this website. Now, the article that we are going to read is entitled The Perks or the Benefits, the Pros of Being Relentlessly Curious. Okay, the perks of being relentlessly curious. Now, that title in and of itself is interesting. So the benefits of being not just curious, but relentlessly curious, without let up, without giving in, without stopping. If we are relentless in something, we don't stop, we don't give in, we don't give up. So this is the benefits of always being curious, basically. The perks of being relentlessly curious. So what we're going to do, as I said at the beginning of this episode, we're going to read the article in its entirety. Okay, and I really just want you to listen. Don't worry about understanding everything, because we're going to go through that in a moment. But just listen and enjoy this superbly written article. So yeah, just read along with me if you're watching on YouTube. If you are listening on Spotify, then just Just listen, just enjoy it, get the main points, try to understand the principles, the ideas that are being put across. And then afterwards, we're going to break it down. We're going to go back paragraph by paragraph, talk about it, analyze it, look at the vocabulary. And then we're going to look at how curiosity aids our English. Okay, how can we take this idea of curiosity, put it into our learning of English and help us to improve? So that's the program. Here we go. The perks of being relentlessly curious. Enjoy. There are benefits of being curious just for curiosity's sake, instead of pursuing a higher goal, something I believe nobody can teach us better than Leonardo da Vinci. Here's an example to illustrate my point. At the time when he was perfecting Mona Lisa's smile, Leonardo was spending his nights in the depths of a morgue, peeling the flesh of cadavers and exposing the muscles and nerves underneath. He became fascinated about how a smile begins to form and instructed himself to analyse every possible movement of each part of the face and determine the origin of every nerve that controls each facial muscle. This may seem reasonable for a perfectionist such as him, but the interesting part is that tracing which of those nerves are cranial and which are spinal were not necessary for painting a smile. But Leonardo needed to know. He painted the Mona Lisa for 14 years, until his death in 1519. If he had lived another decade, he likely would have continued to refine it for that much longer. Delivering a work, declaring it finished, freezes its evolution. Leonardo did not like that. There was always something more to learn, another stroke to glean from nature that would make a picture closer to perfect. For example, he updated St. Jerome in the Wilderness after 30 years, when his anatomy experiments taught him something new about neck muscles. Leonardo enjoyed the challenge of conception more than the chore of completion. One of the reasons why very few of his paintings were finished. Yes, he was wildly imaginative and creative across multiple disciplines, but none of these skills were innate. Leonardo had no schooling and could barely read Latin or do long division. His genius was based on skills we can aspire to improve in ourselves, such as an insatiable curiosity and intense observation. His curiosity was often about phenomena that most people over the age of 10 no longer puzzle about. Why is the sky blue? How are clouds formed? Why can our eyes see only in a straight line? What is yawning? Apart from questions he wanted to explore, he also listed things he wanted to figure out. For example, he writes, "Observe the goose's foot. If it were always open or always closed, the creature would not be able to make any kind of movement." Or, one quite eccentric, "Describe the tongue of the woodpecker." I mean, who on earth would decide one day for no apparent reason that they wanted to know what the tongue of a woodpecker looks like? It's not information Leonardo needed to paint a picture, but there it was. Other topics he listed in his notebooks were more ambitious. Which nerve causes the eye to move so that the motion of one eye moves the other? Describe the beginning of a human when it is in the womb. Along with the woodpecker, he lists the jaw of a crocodile and the placenta of the calf as things he wants to describe. His curiosity was aided by the sharpness of his eye, which focused on things that the rest of us glance over. One night he saw lightning flash behind some buildings, and for that instant they looked smaller. So he launched a series of experiments to verify that objects look smaller when surrounded by light and look larger in the midst of dark. The trick for closely observing a scene or object, according to Leonardo, is to look carefully and separately at each detail. He compared it to looking at the page of a book, which is meaningless when taken in as a whole, and instead need to be looked at word by word. If you wish to have a sound knowledge of the form of objects, begin with the details of them. And do not go to the second step until you have the first well fixed in memory, instructs Leonardo. Apart from things he wanted to observe, Leonardo also had the day's list of things he wanted to learn, especially from others. Get the master of arithmetic to show you how to square a triangle. Ask Giannino, the bombardier, about how the Tower of Ferrara is walled. Ask Benedetto Protinari by what means they walk on ice in Flanders. Get a master of hydraulics to tell you how to repair a lock, canal and mill in the Lombard manner. Get the measurement of the sun promised me by Maestro Giovanni Franceschi, the Frenchman, and so on. The beauty of Leonardo's notebook is that it indulges his provisional thoughts, half-finished ideas, unpolished sketches, and unrefined drafts. He occasionally declared an intent to organise and refine his notework, jottings into published works, but never did. As he did with many of his paintings, Leonardo would hang on to the treatises that he was drafting, occasionally make a few new strokes and refinements, but never see them through to being released to the public as complete. The trove of work that he left unpublished testifies to the unusual nature of what motivated him. He wanted to accumulate knowledge for its own sake and for his own personal joy, rather than out of a desire to make a public name for himself as a scholar or to be part of the progress of history. I have no special talents, Einstein once wrote to a friend. I am just passionately curious. Leonardo actually did have special talents, as did Einstein, but his distinguishing and most inspiring trait was his intense curiosity. Being relentlessly and randomly curious about everything around us is something that each of us can push ourselves to do every waking hour, just as Leonardo did. And what about all of the scholars and critics over the years who concluded that Leonardo squandered too much time immersed in studying unrelated subjects and pursuing multiple disciplines? The Mona Lisa answers them with a smile. What an incredibly written article, and my reading did not do it justice at all. But yeah, if you want to go back and just listen to that again before we go through it, please do, because it's just so well written. And the premise here is really the idea that what made Leonardo da Vinci so incredible, such a fantastic artist and a character in history, wasn't really his works as such. It's what we can learn about his curiosity. It was his curiosity that led to such incredible creations. And really the idea that we don't stop being curious in many different ways. So, if you're ready, we're going to take this bit by bit, look at the vocabulary, and see what we can glean from it now. So it starts off by saying, there are benefits of being curious just for curiosity's sake, instead of pursuing a higher goal. Excuse me. So it initially starts off by saying, there are benefits of being curious just for the sake of being curious. For the sake of something is for the reason of. So there are benefits to just being curious, not because of a higher goal, not because of an achievement, not because we want to do something, but just for the reason of being curious. And that is an interesting concept in and of itself, isn't it? Often when we think of curiosity, it's because we want to achieve a goal. We want to accomplish something. We want to do something. But here it says, there's benefits of being curious just for being curious. There's no other motive involved. So something I believe nobody can teach us better than Leonardo da Vinci, of course, being the main subject of what we're talking about. So it talks about the Mona Lisa, the famous picture known for the Mona Lisa's smile. So when he was perfecting this, when he was not, when we say perfecting it, this took years to perfect. It wasn't just a piece of art that he drew in an afternoon because of a little bit of inspiration. The time he was perfecting it. So that suggests this was at the time when he was going back and back again to Mona Lisa, just trying to get it as close to perfection as he could. At this time, Leonardo, he was spending his nights in the depths of a morgue. Okay, a morgue, place where dead bodies are. Peeling the flesh of cadavers, corpses, bodies. Not in a weird way, well, it's kind of weird, but with the idea of understanding what was underneath, understanding the muscles, the nerves, the way the body worked, the way it was formed. If that's not curiosity, I don't know what is. And then because of this, he became fascinated. If we are fascinated by something, we are intrigued. We want to know more. Many of you avid listeners know I love cars. I'm fascinated about engines. I love the way they work, and I find the whole process fascinating. I'm interested in it. But he was fascinated about how a smile begins to form, what the muscles do under the skin, how the nerves respond. So he instructed himself. He told himself to analyze, to deeply investigate, to deeply study in detail every movement of each part of the face. I mean, when you actually just think about that, when we move, I'm moving my face around now on camera, there's so much going on, isn't there? There's so much we don't even think about in the way our mouth moves, when we smile, when we frown, when we blink. The way our mouth moves. So he instructed himself. He set himself the goal of understanding what on earth was going on. Why was what was happening? So he wanted to determine the origin of every nerve that controls each facial muscle. This is almost beyond curiosity. To me, this kind of borders with the idea of obsession, doesn't it? It's quite interesting. There's a whole nother topic to be discussed there. So this analysis of every nerve, it might seem reasonable for a perfectionist such as him. He wants to get that perfect smile. And the only way he felt he could do this was by truly understanding what was going on underneath what we can generally see. But this is the interesting part. Tracing, or going back to which of those nerves are cranial from the brain and which are spinal from the spine, they weren't necessary for painting a smile. Most artists can paint a smile. And the reality is, there's plenty of other artists out there in the world that have created incredible pieces with facial expressions and smiles. They didn't go peeling off the flesh of corpses. But for Leonardo, he needed to know. He needed to understand what was going on underneath the skin. He was a perfectionist. A perfectionist is somebody that will settle for nothing less than perfection, which is often very rarely achieved. Somebody that always strives for perfection very rarely gets it, because we're not perfect. And is it Bob Ross? Is it Bob Ross, the artist, that said, this is a different approach to art, of course. I think it was him that said, there's no mistakes, just happy little errors. I can't remember the way he worded it. If you've got any Bob Ross fans out there, please let me know. But basically, he was saying that when you're creating art, there's no mistakes. It's just happy little lines or something like that, in the essence that you just roll with that. That's what's happened. So it's part of your art now. And the idea of being a perfectionist, it is such... It swings and roundabouts. There's pros and cons because, of course, if you are a perfectionist, what you produce, if you produce it, is as good as you can do. But the other issue is that you're always chasing perfection, so you often fail to finish or accomplish anything because you deem it not to be perfect. And it's actually one of the biggest issues I've noticed being involved in the language sphere and trying to help people reach their English goals. When a student is too fixated on perfection, it actually hinders their progress. We will go on to talk about this a little bit later, but actually, if you do find yourself being a perfectionist, when that comes to accents, pronunciation, vocabulary, the use of idioms and phrasal verbs, when somebody is a complete perfectionist, it actually hinders them in so many different ways. So it's getting that balance right, isn't it? We want to excel, we want to offer our best and be the best version of ourselves, but perfection is not a state that we can achieve. So coming back to Leonardo da Vinci, he was a perfectionist. And did he ever achieve perfection? I guess that's subjective, but we're not too sure. He painted the Mona Lisa for 14 years, until his death in 1519. If he had lived another decade, he likely would have continued to refine it for that much longer. 14 years he painted the Mona Lisa for. And it goes on to state that if he had lived for another decade, he would have still been refining. He would have still been working on that piece. It would never have been finished, because there's an interesting statement next that delivering a work, declaring it finished, freezes its evolution. So once you deliver a work, a piece of art, if Leonardo had handed that piece of art in to whoever sold it and said it's finished, then it no longer has the opportunity to evolve. And for Leonardo, he wasn't happy with this. Now again, this is borders on the line of obsession for me. You know, it's good to finish a piece of art. Perhaps you make some mistakes, you learn from them. Maybe the mistakes are what make the art incredible, and then you move on. But for Leonardo, that wasn't his idea of art, was it? There's always something else to learn that he would then need to incorporate into the picture. For example, the Mona Lisa, perhaps he learnt something else about nature, about the way the face works, the muscles move, the nerves, that once he learnt that, well, he needed to adjust the painting to incorporate what he has learnt. Constantly curious. For example, one painting called St. Jerome in the Wilderness, after 30 years, when his anatomy experiments taught him something new about neck muscles, he made an adjustment. After 30 years, he didn't think, right, I'm going to apply that to any painting going forward. He said, no, I've got to go back. I've got to adjust it. I respect the tenacity. Incredible, really. But this idea, nothing is finished, really. Because we just keep on learning. That's such an interesting concept. Leonardo enjoyed the challenge of conception more than the chore of completion. That's a really interesting sentence. So to enjoy the challenge of conception, he enjoyed giving birth to ideas, to creating paintings, to adapting them, to adjusting them. He enjoyed that challenge. On the flip side, he referred completion, that being a chore. Getting to the point where I've got to finish this painting, I need to get it done, I move on to the next, well, then it becomes a chore, it becomes a burden, it becomes work. But for Leonardo, it was all about that challenge of creation, conception, developing the idea. He was wildly imaginative and creative. When we describe someone as wildly, ultimately, unbelievably, to an extent of being crazy, he was imaginative and creative across multiple disciplines, multiple skills. But it states that none of these skills were innate. Within him naturally, born. Leonardo had no schooling, could barely read Latin or do long division. His genius was based on skills we can aspire to improve in ourselves. So his genius was based on skills that we can all aspire or want or dream to improve in ourselves, such as an insatiable curiosity. If something is insatiable, It can't be stopped to the point where perhaps it's a little bit too much. Leonardo just had this insatiable, unstoppable curiosity and intense observation. And his curiosity was often about phenomena, things that can't be explained. And there's so many questions that we ponder over when we're younger, don't we? Over the age of 10, it raises questions like, why is the sky blue? I remember asking my parents that, why is the sky blue? I can actually remember we were on the way down to Cornwall to visit my nan. I remember looking at the clouds out the window. Why is the sky blue? Can't remember what answer my parents gave me. How are clouds formed? Why can our eyes only see in a straight line? What is yawning? His curiosity about these questions that he just never really stopped asking. He just would look at something and be curious about it. And I'm kind of envious of that because as we get older, go through life, you stop asking questions, don't you? Yeah. Even perhaps it's because we feel that we should know the answers by now, and it's a lack of success to ask these questions. I don't know. But Leonardo said, no, I'm always going to be curious. You can't stop me. Apart from questions he wanted to explore, to investigate, he also listed things he wanted to figure out, and one of which, in his writings, was about the goose's foot. If it was always open or always closed, wouldn't be able to make any kind of movement. Incredible. Curious about it. The tongue of a woodpecker goes on to talk about. And then the writer goes on to say, who on earth would decide one day for no apparent reason that they wanted to know what the tongue of a woodpecker looks like? It's not information Leonardo needed to paint a picture, but there it was. He was curious. He had an insatiable curiosity, intense observation. Maybe he saw a woodpecker. Thought, wow, why is its tongue like that? I don't know. But for most of us, we just go, oh, that's strange. And that's it. But we don't have that insatiable curiosity to find out the answer. Other topics he listed in his notebooks were more ambitious. Which of the nerve causes the eyes to move so that the motion of one eye moves the other? That's incredible, isn't it? One eye moves to the left, generally speaking, so does the other one. They follow each other. Which nerve causes that to happen? The curiosity of a human when it's in the womb. Absolutely amazing. Along with the woodpecker, from an animal point of view, the jaw of a crocodile, the placenta of the calf. These are all things he wanted to describe, and they weren't just questions that he was throwing out there. From what I could see and research, these were questions that he was ambitious. He was determined to know the answer to. This wasn't just a, I wonder why, and then moving on, like I do all the time. It was I'm going to find out the answer to that. Insatiable curiosity. And one of the reasons he had this was the sharpness of his eye. So he had a sharp eye, would notice things that the rest of us would just glance over. We just look at and we move on. But Leonardo would look at it and think, why? How? What? That was the kind of eye he had. And he gives this brilliant example that one night he saw lightning flash behind some buildings. So some buildings, storm, lightning flashes behind. And he noticed that for that instant, the buildings looked smaller. That's something that we would probably just accept, or we wouldn't really notice. But for Leonardo, he thought, why? Why did that just happen? Why was there a flash of lightning? That was my flash, by the way. That wasn't a very good flash. You get the idea. Flash of lightning, and then the buildings were smaller. Why on earth did that happen? So he didn't just ask why and just throw that question out into the universe. He found answers. He launched a series of experiments to verify why objects look smaller when surrounded by light and look larger and dark. He couldn't just ask why. He had to try, at least, to find out the answer. They came to this conclusion. The trick for closely observing a scene or object, according to Leonardo, is to look carefully and separately at each detail. So his thing was, you don't just look at something as a whole, you look at all of the details. And this is true, actually. My wife and I, when was it? Last year. Well, this is kind of what I was trying to do. I always try and relate to, if I'm trying to learn something or take something from it, I always try and apply it to an instance in my life. I remember my wife and I went for a walk in the English countryside here. And there was a couple of horses on the walk in a field, and we called them over and they came over. And I remember, I grew up around horses. Not that we had horses, but in fields near me, there was always horses around. I remember just look at them, you just take them and you think they're cool. But I was kind of just transfixed by all of the different elements of a horse. This might sound weird, but looking at all of the details, the muscles in its legs, the necks, the way the back moves so perfectly, the tail, their incredible eyes and their mouth. And you realise when you look at the parts separately, that creates curiosity. So that was Leonardo's point, rather than just looking at everything generally, look at points individually, separately. For example, if you look at the page of a book, if you just look at it, it means nothing. But when you take it word for word, you can read and you can understand what is going on. Goes on to say, if you wish to have a sound knowledge of the forms of objects, begin with the details of them, and do not go on to the second step until you have the first well fixed in memory. Basically saying, don't move on with information until you've understood, until you've got the answers to the first parts. And then he goes on to give some examples. We're not going to go too much into detail on that because I got the names completely wrong. I did practice them before, but all of the names sound Italian to me. But yeah, he had details of things he wanted to observe, but also he had days of lists of things he wanted to learn from others. And that is a great concept in and of itself. Never be afraid to learn from others. And I think this is particularly true as we get on in life. Maybe there's a little bit of pride that kicks in, I don't know. But if we're all humble, if we're all willing to learn from each other, everyone's got something to teach. Life lessons, their field of expertise. We've all got something to teach. And what a shame if we get to a point where we think, I can't learn anything from anyone else. I've learnt enough. It just never happens, doesn't it? And this was Leonardo's thing. Yeah. Always had something he wanted to learn from someone else. So it talks about the beauty of Leonardo's notebook is that it indulges his provisional thoughts, half-finished ideas, unpolished sketches, and unrefined drafts. And to indulge means to, to really look into and to kind of magnify, to elevate his unfinished ideas, unpolished sketches, unrefined drafts. He occasionally threw out the idea that he's going to organise it, refine his notebook, finish it. Look at his jottings. If we jot something down, we roughly write it on paper. But he never did. And looking at this article, I wonder if he ever would have. I wonder if that was something that he could have conceived, the idea of completing that notebook. As he did with many of his paintings, Leonardo would hang on to the treatises that he was drafting. A treatise is a written work dealing formally and systematically with a subject. So basically, many of his paintings, Leo would hang on to the notes, the details that would go along with his paintings that he was drafting, so he could refine it, so he could make the strokes that were necessary to get to that point of perfection. The trove, the amount of work that he left unpublished testifies. The massive amount of work that he left unpublished testifies to the unusual nature of what motivated him. And this is really the point. What was his motivation? He wanted to accumulate. He wanted to build. He wanted to gain knowledge for its own sake, for his own personal joy. rather than the desire of making a name for himself, to be part of history, which he just came as a result of this. But his main goal, his motivation was curiosity, to know for the sake of knowing, for himself, for his own personal joy of kind of fulfilling that curiosity. That was his motivation. That was it. Having the name that he has today wasn't his goal. That was just an outcome. And it goes on to give a quote of Einstein, who said, "I have no special talents." It's hard to believe, isn't it, from someone like Einstein? He said, "I am just passionately curious." Leonardo did have special talents. It goes on, as did Einstein. We know that they did. But for them, their talents wasn't the reason they were successful. It was curiosity. It was that intense curiosity. Both of these men, Da Vinci, Einstein, and countless men and women throughout history have been successful, made a name for themselves. They say, what was it that made them successful? That intense curiosity. Then it gives this great statement: being relentlessly and randomly curious about everything around us. I love that. So relentlessly, we don't give up. We keep on being curious. Also randomly, we don't limit ourselves to just being curious about certain things. This is something I want to work on. Randomly curious. You see something that you'd never normally look at. It's random. Wouldn't normally interest you. Well, be curious about it. Each of us should push ourselves to be more curious every waking hour. So every hour we're awake, Leonardo says, be curious. Don't stop asking questions. So the final part of this paragraph, I'm just going to read it one more time because it sums it all up and it's brilliant. And what about all of the scholars and critics over the years who concluded that Leonardo squandered too much time immersed in studying unrelated subjects and pursuing multiple disciplines? So there's many critics, many scholars out there who said that Leonardo basically wasted his talents. He wasted so much time studying unrelated subjects and pursuing multiple disciplines, kind of indulging his curiosity. They say that was a waste of time. He could have achieved and put out so much more. Well, the Mona Lisa answers them with a smile. Basically, to me, that smile says, that shows you don't get it. You don't get it. He wasn't about being perfection or being perceived by others as perfect. It was all for him. What a brilliant article. That being curious for the sake of being curious. Gaining knowledge because we want to. Learning because we want to. And just finding the joy in learning. We don't ever stop learning, do we? We never stop. What an interesting concept. And this really does tie in to the English language or learning English. Curiosity is essential to learning English on a deep level, because if we are curious, we connect with the language. And curiosity sparks interest. Curiosity sparks interest. When we find something intriguing about the English language, something that we go, that's interesting, a new word, something about British culture or a captivating story, when we encounter that and we have questions about it, well, that motivation to find the answer fuels the fire. So we've got to act on that curiosity we have. Don't just ignore it. Ask yourself why, when, what, how, and find the answer. That is how we connect and how we develop the language on a personal level. We become intrinsically motivated to understand and master the language when we are curious. And perhaps we've lost that curiosity a little bit. Perhaps we've just got to the point where we're not as curious as we used to be. Perhaps when we first studied or started learning English, or we had an element of motivation, we looked up everything, every idiom, every word, blah, blah, blah. But perhaps we're at a point where that curiosity is just gone a little bit. It's not quite the same as it used to be. Well, what can we do to ignite that curiosity again? Learn English for learning English, for the joy of learning a language. And when we do that, we become curious about it. And I just really love that point about being a perfectionist, that if we are a perfectionist, particularly when it comes to our English skills, you're never going to be perfect. I'm a native English speaker and I'm not perfect. Your accent is never going to be perfect. Your pronunciation is never going to be perfect. Perfect. See, I made a mistake. Perfect English doesn't exist. It's not out there. We just learn more, we get better, and we keep on learning it. Like with the Mona Lisa, like with that Saint Jerome, he kept going back and just improving it. And that is what happens with the English language. We just keep on improving through curiosity. Really interesting thought that. I thoroughly enjoyed that article. As I said, check it out in the link below. Check out their website, coffeeandjunk.com. If I forget to put it in the description, which I most probably will, let me know in the comments and I'll give you the link. But you can always just type it in yourself. Coffeeandjunk.com. Brilliant articles on there. I highly recommend if you want some advanced reading that throws out some interesting vocabulary and expressions, but also gets you thinking ethically, logically, culturally, and about yourself on a personal level. Check out their articles. Absolutely brilliant. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you did enjoy that. I'm always trying to come up with interesting topics that I think will get you thinking in English and, learn English without knowing that we're learning English. But just as a note, in January, I do plan on going back to 2 podcasts a week. Okay? That is the goal. I know I go back and forth between these, but sometimes life is busier, isn't it, than other times. So, yeah, in January, I plan on going back to 2 podcasts a week. That's the goal. So it'll be Wednesday morning and Sunday morning. I'm kind of thinking of ideas just to mix it up a little bit. I want to keep it alive. And 2025, I really want to grow the podcast, be consistent with 2 a week. So that's the goal. If I can be proactive, productive, and actually do what I say I'm going to do, I can guarantee you over next week I'm not going to do anything I said I'm going to do, because I'm just going to switch off. Nothing wrong with that, is there? I don't know about you, but particularly when you're busy, you just kind of, when you sit down doing nothing, sometimes you have this guilt of, I should be doing something. Next week, my wife and I have said, no, we're not having that. We're eating chocolate, eating a lot of food. We're going to play games, going to watch films, just veg out a little bit. Just stop, unwind, because life goes on and the next week it will just resume. So, yeah, I hope you got some time to relax as we come up towards the end of the year. I hope you got some time just to unwind a little bit, whatever you're doing, whatever your plans are. Here in England, being December, today is so I've been playing with something on my desk, a little piece of, like it's a unfolded staple. I've been playing with it throughout the podcast. Hope you haven't noticed. And I just, when it goes under your nail, just did that. So there you go. What was I saying? Yeah, the weather here in England it's been really good for December. A little bit windy, a little bit rainy, but I think, today it's 12 degrees, which for December is really good. Apparently we've got a bit of snow coming in, which I think is going to hit Scotland. So I wouldn't mind a little bit of snow. I like a little bit of snow, but not too much. I hate that stage afterwards where it's just slushy and horrible and you just had enough of it. So yeah, December in England so far has been all right. Blue skies today, 12 degrees. Can't complain at all. So thank you so much for watching, listening. Next week's episode is most likely going to be a little bit of a recap of 2024 and my advice for learning English in 2025. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great week wherever you are, and I will see you all very soon. Have a good one, guys.